The school hallway echoed with whispers as a white-haired lady principal slammed the expulsion notice on her desk. Across from her, a single dad clenched his fists, his 10-year-old son trembling beside him. "Your boy doesn't belong here," she spat. Chairs scraped, doors slammed, and by the end of that day, he was gone. But the next morning, the sky above the school thundered with the blades of a descending helicopter. Every student, teacher, and parent rushed outside staring in disbelief. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. ****. The clock hadn't even struck noon when Principal Margaret Hayes, a sharp-faced woman in her late 50s, called Ethan Miller, a hard-working single dad in his 30s, into her office. His son, Jake Miller, just 10 years old, clung nervously to his father's hand. "Your boy is disruptive, Mr. Miller. He's late." "He's a distraction," she declared, her voice slicing like glass. Ethan swallowed hard. "Ma'am, he was late because I had to pick up an extra shift." "I'm doing my best." "Jake's doing his best." His voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules. Effective immediately, your son is expelled." Jake's lip quivered. "Dad," he whispered. Ethan crouched, pulling his boy into his arms. "It's okay, buddy. We'll figure this out." He kissed the top of Jake's head, hiding his own brokenness. Students lingered outside the office, whispering and pointing. One teacher, Mrs. Carter, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, dared to step forward. "Principal Hayes, with all due respect, Jake is a bright child." "Expelling him, this isn't right." Margaret cut her off with a glare. "This is final." Ethan gathered his son's backpack. Every step down that hallway felt heavier than steel chains. Jake clutched his father's sleeve, tears dripping silently. Other kids laughed, mocking, cruel. Ethan turned, his jaw tight, and said softly to his son, "Kindness will always outlast cruelty." "Don't ever forget that, Jake." That night, as they ate reheated soup in their small apartment, Ethan's phone buzzed. An old contact, one he hadn't spoken to in years, left a message. "We need to talk." "Urgent?" Jake asked quietly. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed a storm. "No, son. For the first time in a long while." "I think they are." The morning sun barely crept over the horizon when the quiet town of Brookfield was ripped awake by a sound no one expected. WHUP-WHUP-WHUP. The rhythmic thunder of rotor blades shook the schoolyard. As children dropped their backpacks, teachers stepped out of classrooms, and even Principal Hayes' coffee mug still in hand rushed to the window. A sleek black helicopter sliced through the sky, descending with force onto the open football field. Dust whipped into the air, students shielded their eyes, and murmurs spread like wildfire. "What is happening?" gasped a 7th grader. "Is it the police? The military?" Another whispered. Margaret Hayes straightened her suit jacket, lips pressed tight. She wasn't accustomed to surprises, and certainly not ones this dramatic. The helicopter landed with a shuddering roar. Its door swung open, and out stepped Ethan Miller. But this was not the Ethan the school thought they knew. Gone was the tired single dad in worn-out jeans and second-hand boots. Today, he wore a tailored navy suit that seemed cut from authority itself. His stride was sharp, his shoulders square, his eyes burning with a confidence that silenced even the boldest of whispers. Behind him followed 2 men in dark suits, earpieces tucked discreetly in their ears. And then students gasped louder. A tall woman in her 40s emerged, her presence commanding. She was instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever glanced at a Forbes cover or watched financial news. Charlotte Davis, billionaire investor. One of the most powerful women in the United States. Why is she here? A teacher muttered in disbelief. Ethan didn't speak immediately. He let the moment stretch, let the weight of the helicopter, the bodyguards, and Charlotte's arrival sink into every staring face. Jake trailed beside him, clutching his father's hand, only this time his chest wasn't hunched in shame. It was lifted in pride. Principal Hayes stormed down the steps toward the field, her heels stabbing the concrete. "Mr. Miller, what in heaven's name is this spectacle?" Ethan stopped just shy of her, his calmness chilling. "This spectacle, Margaret, is the consequence of cruelty." Gasps rippled. No one called the principal by her first name. Margaret flushed red. "Excuse me?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice was measured. "Yesterday, you expelled my son for circumstances beyond his control. You humiliated him, and you humiliated me. You thought we were powerless. You thought we had no one to stand for us." He gestured behind him to Charlotte Davis, who now stepped forward with the grace of a lioness. "For years, I kept quiet about who I once worked for," Ethan continued. "I didn't want attention. I wanted a normal life for my boy. But yesterday changed that." Charlotte extended her hand to Jake. "You must be Jake Miller," she said warmly. "Your father once saved my life." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Mrs. Carter, the kind teacher, pressed her hands over her mouth. Margaret blinked rapidly. "What saved your life?" Charlotte's voice carried across the courtyard. "Years ago, when I was targeted during a business trip overseas, Ethan Miller was the security operative assigned to me. He shielded me from danger, put his own life on the line, and never once asked for recognition. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today. I owe him a debt that no amount of money could repay." Students erupted in whispers, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the single dad they had once dismissed. Ethan's hand rested protectively on Jake's shoulder. "My boy deserves dignity. He deserves opportunity. And he will have both." His gaze pinned Principal Hayes. "But you chose humiliation. You chose power over compassion." Margaret tried to collect herself. "I enforced the rules." Charlotte cut her off sharply. "You enforced cruelty. And I will not let it stand." Two of Charlotte's aides stepped forward, carrying a leather briefcase. One snapped it open, revealing pristine documents. Charlotte held them high enough for Margaret and the crowd to see. "As of this morning," Charlotte announced, "I have purchased a significant share in the school's private trust. Effective immediately, Ethan Miller will be joining the board of advisors. And his son, Jake, will be reinstated, not as a charity case, but as a student who belongs here." The courtyard erupted. Gasps, cheers, shouts of disbelief. Jake's eyes widened, tears of relief brimming. "Dad, I get to stay?" Ethan knelt, pulling his boy into a fierce hug. "Not just stay, son. You'll rise higher than they ever thought possible." Mrs. Carter, the teacher who had defended Jake, stepped forward timidly. "Mr. Miller, Jake, I'm so glad." Ethan smiled softly at her. "Thank you for speaking up when others didn't. That kindness, it mattered." Her cheeks flushed. It was just the truth. Ethan stood again, turning to the gathered crowd. His voice lowered, but the quiet made it cut deeper than any shout. "To every child standing here, never believe you are less just because someone in authority tells you so. My son isn't a rule breaker. He's a fighter. And one day, so will you be." Margaret's face had gone pale. Her authority, once unshakable, seemed to crack beneath the weight of the billionaire's presence, the helicopter, and Ethan's unflinching resolve. She stammered, This is highly irregular. You can't just..." Charlotte's gaze was icy. "I can. And I have." At that moment, Jake tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we go inside?" His voice was small, timid. Ethan nodded, guiding his son past Margaret without so much as a glance. The crowd parted for them, whispers following like a trail of fire. As they stepped into the school building again, this time not as outcasts but as victors, Jake looked up at his father. "You didn't yell. You didn't get mad. You just..." Showed them. Ethan ruffled his son's hair. Real power doesn't need shouting, Jake. Real power is quiet. It's steady. And it's kind. Jake hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm proud you're my dad." For the first time in years, Ethan Miller allowed himself a small, unguarded smile. Outside, the helicopter blades stilled, but the storm Ethan had unleashed in that schoolyard was only just beginning. The echoes of the helicopter landing still lingered in the air long after Ethan and Jake had walked back into the school building. Students huddled in corners, buzzing with rumors. Teachers whispered like nervous sparrows. And Principal Margaret Hayes, her once firm grip over the school, was unraveling right before everyone's eyes. Inside the hallway, Ethan walked slowly, Jake at his side. Every student who had laughed at Jake yesterday now moved out of his way, eyes lowered. The boy who had been mocked was now untouchable, and they knew it. Jake's grip on his father's hand was tighter than ever. "Dad, they're all staring," he whispered. "Let them," Ethan replied softly, his voice carrying calm strength. "They're not staring at shame anymore. They're staring at change." When they reached Jake's classroom, Mrs. Carter stood waiting at the door, her face warm with pride. "Jake, welcome back," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We missed you." Jake's eyes widened, his lips curling into the first genuine smile he'd had in days. He whispered, "Thank you, ma'am," before stepping back into the room where, only yesterday, he had been escorted out like a criminal. Ethan stayed outside, leaning against the wall. For once, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel crushing. It felt lighter. But across the hallway, Principal Hayes approached, her heels clicking like gunshots against tile. Her expression was stormy, but her voice carried a false sweetness. "Mr. Miller," she said, folding her arms. "A dramatic entrance, I'll give you that. But don't think this little stunt makes you untouchable." Ethan turned slowly, meeting her glare with steady eyes. "It's not about me being untouchable. It's about teaching my son and every child here that they have worth." "You forgot that, Margaret." Her jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me in front of the entire school. In front of a billionaire." Ethan's voice was calm, yet sharp. "No, you embarrassed yourself when you chose cruelty over compassion." Charlotte Davis, who had been speaking quietly with school trustees in the principal's office, appeared beside Ethan then. Her heels were silent, but her presence made Margaret flinch. "Principal Hayes," Charlotte said coldly, "I've reviewed several complaints from parents and teachers about your methods, expelling children for tardiness, shaming students publicly. I find it unacceptable." Margaret stammered. I was simply enforcing discipline." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "Discipline without humanity is tyranny. And tyranny has no place in education." She turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miller, as of today, the board and I are voting on immediate changes in leadership." The color drained from Margaret's face. You can't." Charlotte cut her off. "I can. And I will." Teachers gathered around, watching the once feared principal shrink under the weight of judgment. For years, she had ruled with an iron fist, silencing voices, humiliating students. Now that empire was crumbling right in front of them. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but carrying. "Margaret, my son will never forget what you did. But I hope you do. I hope you remember it every time you look at a child and think about shaming them. Maybe then you'll understand what real power is." Margaret's lips trembled, but she had no words left. For the first time in decades, the principal was utterly powerless. Charlotte motioned to the aides. "Effective immediately, Mrs. Carter will serve as acting principal until the board finalizes a replacement. The children here deserve someone who sees them as human beings, not numbers on a paper." Mrs. Carter's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her chest. "Me?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You've already proven you've got the heart for it. That's what matters most." The teachers erupted in applause, soft at first, then swelling into thunder. Students peeked from their classrooms, clapping nervously before joining in. The sound filled the building, shaking the very walls that had once echoed with Margaret's cruelty. Jake stepped out of his classroom, his eyes wide. "Dad, are they cheering for us?" Ethan crouched, pulling his son close. "They're cheering for kindness, buddy. And for the truth." Tears shimmered in Jake's eyes as he hugged his father tightly. For once, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel unwanted. He felt proud. Outside, the helicopter blades started again, sending vibrations through the ground. But this time, no one saw it as a disruption. They saw it as a symbol of change, of justice, of a father who refused to bow to cruelty. Ethan walked with Jake across the courtyard, Charlotte following behind. The crowd parted for them once more. Only now there was no whisper of mockery, only respect. As they reached the gates, a boy from Jake's class, who had laughed at him the day before, stepped forward hesitantly. "Jake." "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Jake looked at his father, uncertain. Ethan gave a small nod. Jake smiled gently, though his voice carried newfound strength. "It's okay. Just don't do it again to anyone." The boy blinked, surprised, then nodded quickly before running off. Ethan ruffled Jake's hair. "See that? That's how you change the world, one choice at a time." Charlotte placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You could have destroyed her reputation completely today. But you didn't. You chose to make your son's victory about grace instead of vengeance. That's the mark of true strength." Ethan exhaled, the fight inside him finally softening. "For years, I thought staying quiet was the way to protect Jake. But yesterday, when she humiliated him, I realized silence is what lets cruelty thrive." He looked down at his son, who now walked with his head held high. "I'll never stay silent again." The helicopter roared as they boarded. Jake pressed his face to the window, watching the school shrink beneath them. The playground, the football field, the courtyard where he had once felt so small, all of it looked different now. Not because the place had changed, but because he had. "Dad," Jake said softly as the helicopter lifted higher, "today was the best day of my life." Ethan's eyes stung, but he smiled. "Mine too, son. Mine too." And as the town grew smaller beneath them, a new chapter opened, not just for Ethan and Jake, but for everyone who had witnessed what happens when courage meets cruelty, and when kindness, no matter how small, becomes the loudest sound in the room.